Hello, Jeando.
Hello, Kevin.
The last video we've been talking about a question you got from a pupil related to how to deal with negative emotions in our emotional life, how to and should we try and deal with our emotional life, and also you were talking about Alexander's uh, famous in the Alexander World quote of freedom in thought and action rather than freedom of thought and action, or freedom in thought and action is required first. So, do you want to talk a little bit more about that, please?
Yes, I would. It's a very interesting question. That should we deal with these negative emotions? What should we do? Yeah, with negative emotions, and it's interesting to look at what the student who asked the question is saying exactly. Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen so that you can see what she says is. What does it really mean to become able to guide ourselves constructively and consciously without suppressing reaction? How do we get better organized in our heads and in our emotional lives? Um, when I look at this question, um, there is something that is reminiscent of an old teaching of the modern Alexander technique. To guide ourselves constructively, uh, well, we will see that it's a combination. I'm just, in fact, talking about what Alexander wrote about it. And but this question of suppressing reaction, we shouldn't be suppressing reaction. That's a very strange way of presenting things. Uh, I never asked that student to suppress any reaction. That's for sure. But at the same time, I asked her to inhibit many reaction. So suppressing a reaction as an element in it of some sort of forgetting one part of ourselves. We are partly emotional, we are partly logical. So if I suppress a reaction, does it mean that I am suppressing myself? That I am somehow losing myself or losing my natural essence? Uh, we are we are dealing with incorrect reaction in every single lessons. Of course, these reactions are not emotional, they are mostly motor. That is, we see that when we react to some verbal stimulation, I ask the pupil to direct the different movements of the parts of the torso in a particular way, explaining beforehand what should be the geometrical result that should be seen on video. And obviously, when we watch the video, we can compare what was the plan, what has been the resulting action of the student, and we want certainly to promote correct reactions and inhibit, should I say suppress? We don't want to see these unwanted movements that are putting our self-preservation at risk. There is Alexander himself direct ourselves toward this idea of self-preservation, but Alexander is very very clever because he's always talking about acts of self-preservation. He's not talking about self-preservation in general. No, no, he's talking about the acts, what we can really consciously, deliberately actuate now. And so suppressing reaction, I have no problem with suppressing reaction. I'm not losing anything when I decide not to reproduce an unwanted movement of the parts. I have no fear about that. I am not losing anything. My act of self-preservation is getting better. Um, And that is getting better organized first in the thinking, because we have to represent these actions. We have to talk about these actions, which is the result of representing. When we are really representing a series of action, we can absolutely talk about them. We can discuss. So I discuss with the student what is the different movement reaction that are seen. And we are discussing also how the pupil could suppress these movements before they happen. There is no stopping a movement when it's already gone. I ask the student to readjust in 2 seconds. It's not possible in 2 seconds to just start and discover that you are suppressing one movement, because if you do, then it will be seen on screen that instead of directing a series of movements all at the same time, what happens is that we revert toward the old instinctive reaction, which we don't want to see, which is to concentrate, to focus on one action, forgetting all the others. When we forget all the others on screen, it's very, very simple. What we see is that the habitual coordination of movements is just taking hold again. And so we may be improving one reaction, while all the other reactions that are shown by the movement of all the other parts are going into the old mode. So we get better organized in our heads by developing the capacity to discuss these movements, the one we want to see and the one we want clearly to suppress. Now, about emotions and negative emotions, it's obvious that suppression is not a big deal. We want to diminish the impulsive reaction. You don't want to go and punch in the face your wife because suddenly you think that there is too much salt in the soup. It's not something you want to, well, actuate in your life. It's absolutely obvious that we are responsible for our reactions, and maybe if suppressing is creating a problem in the mind of the pupil, it's better to say, make a choice. Make a choice, and that choice, of course, has to be conscious. Because when we discuss emotions, we are in fact discussing an urge to act. We are discussing, so for example, you want to hide because you think that you said the wrong thing. You want to disappear under the carpet because you think something that the other people are thinking about you because of something you are or something you do. Yes, but we have to direct ourselves consciously. There is no choice here. It's a different thing I discussed last time when we have recurring thoughts. You can have all the recurring thoughts you want if you don't act them out. If you don't, of course, the pupil is complaining that this is making her life a bit difficult at the moment, but as long as she can organize her poise or composure, she may think what she wants. She may think what comes to her head and look at it as something that is happening. And the subconscious realm is like something that is slightly beyond us. We feel these strong emotions, but we don't have to believe in them. If you hear a little voice saying that you're making a big mistake, that you're never going to succeed, that you always failed in the past, so it's going to happen again, well, it's a voice. That voice has very little power if you don't believe it. Of course, emotions have this capacity to make ourselves believe, to make ourselves want to act. Well, the more agitated you are, the more it's likely that you may act according to this voice. But the more you develop poise, and that is exactly what this student is doing. And she acknowledges that this is what is happening. She said, I still find it easier to respond to directions of movement about going from an unduly lifting of the upper part of the torso over to a rotation of the rib cage with the lower sternum as a center of rotation. She's discussing a complex reorganization of the movement of her rib cage. And she said, it was a completely new thought to me. And it took me time for me to be able to even think the thought. And it took her time to translate that thinking into actions that could be seen on the video recording of a session. It took her time to suppress unwanted movement that she didn't even know she was performing when readjusting according to the correct orders. So it was clearly a process. And she said now, but I can't get it to work like that when it comes to emotional reaction. I think the sentence is incorrect because she said, I can't get it to work like that when it comes to emotional reaction. You have to understand the sentence here. But what we are saying is that get it to work. What is the it she's writing about? Does this mean that she's not able to reorganize the movement of the rib cage according to a new center of rotation that is completely different from her habitual way of using the rib cage when she's in the midst of emotion? Or does she mean that she wants to direct her mind organizing the movements of her subconscious voice? It's impossible to direct the subconscious. You can create new conditions of poise and balance. You can get a better equilibrium. And that equilibrium, you will discover, is not only physical, it's obviously psychophysical. And if you have a better psychophysical equilibrium, well, meaning that you are in the midst of an emotion, sitting or standing or walking with poise, it will be much easier to suppress unwanted reaction, not to go into fidgeting, into grinding your teeth, into opening your mouth in stupefaction, because these actions, yes, can be suppressed. You can't suppress the emotional voice, but of course you can have a choice about how you're going to react or not, and that choice increases with your capacity of poise. So, of course, the two are linked. So, when the student's story at this point is that she's getting a grip to what she calls a completely new thought, that is the possibility of an adequate use at the same time of the parts of the organism, but she fails to see what a correct use of the psychophysical organism could be. Well, that new use of the psychophysical organism should not be directed at trying to command the subconscious voice in herself. Making it a bit dimmer, a bit further away, instead of projecting that emotion in the screen, you know, as if it was occupying all the space of your mind. It's possible, especially with obsessive thoughts that are recurring all the time. It's possible to hear them as a background, you know. Well, you don't want to suppress these voices. Yeah, because you can't. It's impossible. What you can is reorganize the orchestra. You have conscious voices, you have organized verbal activity, and you have totally disorganized verbal activities that is still there. With time, and that is the big question that the pupil is not seeing. Time is of the essence here, that it will take time, because it's no secret between me and that student that for the moment our capacity of organization of the torso is not yet complete. There is still new ideas to discover, new capacities to develop. And so the same thing with the subconscious voice. And we are discussing here something that everybody knows, has heard about, which is mind wandering. But before that, it can be interesting to look at what Alexander is saying. And when he's discussing this question, we discuss changing habits. And he says that, this is, I'm showing an image of the last book, The Universal Constant in Living, page 76 in the third edition, 1947. And that the sentence is, the truth is, so far man has failed to understand fully what is required for changing habit, if the change is to be a fundamental one, because he has not realized that the establishment of a particular habit in a person is associated in that person with a certain habitual manner of using the self. And that because the organism works as an integrated whole, change of a particular habit in the fundamental sense is impossible as long as this habitual manner of use persists. So, the strong emotional voice that has a tendency to make the pupil mind wander in circle when she's certainly trying to do an activity. That activity can be work, it can be rest, it can be anything, and she's disturbed by that voice. You must always remember, when this happens to you, that this particular habit of listening to that voice is associated with a certain habitual manner of using the self. I know it will sound strange, but it could be very interesting at that moment to just video yourself. Look at the habitual manner of using the self. Alexander notes that, for example, when a dog is about to attack, he's got a particular manner of using the self. When you are attacking yourself with unwanted ideas, unwanted thoughts, it could be quite interesting to observe how you're organizing the different movements of the parts of the limbs, of the torso, of the neck, head, facial expression, everything. And then, without trying to affect the voice, the emotional subconscious urge, keep it there, but just play at reorganizing the movements of the different parts in 2 seconds. And experiment to see whether the voice is going to be louder after the reorganization or before. Because I'm still discussing in my head this question whether when the student in the previous image that I'm showing now, I can't get it to work like that when it comes to emotional reactions. Emotional reactions are in your head, but they are also in your use. They are there to be seen. If you suddenly want to take the time and film yourself and look at the video in very slow motion, let's see how you're dealing with creating the change of use that is conscious, that is voluntary and deliberate. How you can get it to work like that, that, and then you stop And with some of my students, it's absolutely obvious that their emotional reaction are associated with proficiency of movements, of little reactions, of little change of attitude, and I ask them to play the suppression game. The suppression game is, of course, a game of suppression of movements where you are asked to perform a coordinated readjustment for 2 seconds. And then you pledge yourself to play the statue for, well, a minute, maybe half a minute, and see if you can just, well, stop all movements. Very often, it's a very interesting change. And I can see that the pupil is not moving in the same way, obviously, because of the conscious decision not to move. But also, the gaze will change, the breathing is changing, and many things happens. So, well, I would counsel the pupil to play that game and see whether there is a connection between the coordination of the movements of the parts in the new use and, well, the strength of the voice. And so, in Alexander is looking at activity. I am very focused on this, and is showing when the person is asked to project a series of connected orders. It's very important to understand this idea of connected orders. I am showing an image in Constructive Conscious Control, the second book of Alexander, page 165, where he's explaining that a pupil comes for remedial work on a plane of conscious control. This is exactly how I present my lessons of initial Alexander technique. And so the student is asked to project a series of connected orders continuously. And he says he naturally finds great difficulty in breaking the habit he has formed of discontinuous attention and of haphazard and subconscious guidance and direction. In fact, it will be found as a rule, the pupil has no conception of linking up the different parts of the movement and the orders relating to these. I believe that the emotional speech is made of disconnected orders, disconnected verbal injunction to act. And the more you discover what do we mean by projecting a series of connected orders continuously, the more it will be possible for you to listen to the orders that are in your mind at one moment. I can't do this. I don't understand. How could this be possible? All these little self-speech sentences that are coming to our mind, that are the subconscious realm, these habits of talks that have been developed without our knowledge. Very often there are ways of speaking that we have taken from parents, from some teachers, some person that we have had as somehow teachers in our young lives, and these sentences are completely warped and emotionally charged. And they are not ours. We cannot say that they are our true self. So you are asked to project a series of connected orders continuously. We are not discussing here neck free, head forward and up, back to lengthen and widen up, obviously, as you will see in a minute. We are really discussing connected orders of movements of different parts at the same time. And of course, to project these orders, you have to develop continuous attention, and you have to develop conscious guidance and direction. So these lessons do more for unbalanced emotion than any sort of psychology, I think, because we are only discussing this willingness to act. We are not projecting a series of connected orders for nothing. Projecting means that we are placing in memory different intentions of movement that we want to perform at the same time in front of a camera. And so we develop the conception of linking up different parts of a movement, which are the movements of the parts, linking up these movements, linking up the orders. When suddenly you get in mind subconscious orders, it has none of the characteristic of the series of connected orders. It's quite easy to spot before letting the activity and the manner of use change. So the pupil is gaining confidence and the pupil is developing. So Alexander talks about a desirable combination in human activity, namely an adequate and correct use of the psychophysical organism as a whole, together with an adequate use at the same time of the parts of that organism. And that is written in Constructive Conscious Control, page 4. It's the very beginning of the book. So let's go and look at that. Alexander is, explaining that through this development of our capacity to project continuous direction, we get a desirable combination in human activity. So first of all, you have to note that we are discussing an activity. We are discussing the capacity to continue the activity despite disruptions, despite mind wandering, despite emotions that are springing. Every single time when I ask the person to perform an activity, a complex activity that is made of new movements and ever more difficult suppression of unwanted movements, the person is going to be assaulted by emotions. I can't do it. I don't even know how to start to do what you ask me to do. Very often in that case, I explain to the pupil that we are not after the person being capable of doing all these movements at the same time perfectly. We just want to see what would happen if the person were doing these movements. So I just insist and push the student to perform some action he does not really understand, some he doesn't really feel he's doing, some that are apparently beyond his capacity for the moment. You must understand that this must absolutely raise a storm of emotion in the mind of the pupil. I absolutely know this. Well, it's difficult not to see it when you look at the pupil in the midst of this reaction. But I stress the need for activity. I say to the person, it's the right time. You are a bit overwhelmed. You are a bit out of your bounds. You don't know if you can succeed, or more or less you are pretty sure you can't. And I just ask the pupil to continue. Enter into activity despite the fear, despite the fear of not working correctly, the fear of not making the right move, the fear of appearing not capable. I say, just go. Give me a 2 seconds readjustment. And the person will get into the habit of performing, as I say, under duress. That is, the subconscious realm, the subconscious voice is really activated, and we want to see what the person can do, how she can organize her attention, organize her memory, because she has to remember all the different parts she has to move at the same time. Organize also the memory of what happened in the previous experiments where some unwanted movement were appearing, and we were very keen on inhibiting these movements before they happen. Well, there is a very active psychophysical activity at that moment. And the pupil will discover that, well, yeah, it's not particularly pleasant to have all these emotions in mind at that time. But somehow, it does not prevent the student from performing new coordinations that are certainly better than the old ones. This is the power of the word. This is the power of the psychophysical activity. And so the more the pupil is going to realize the power of the word, the power of the conscious mind, or the power of the organization of the conscious mind, the more the power of the subconscious voices is going to diminish. Well, they are going to be as loud, they are going to be as present. But when you look at the activity, it's not imposing something on the pupil. We get in the new realm where, well, you can perform when you are in difficulty, when you are obsessed or pressed by unwanted thoughts. And so the completely new thought that is the result of developing your capacity of conscious guidance is not that you organize your subconscious activity. It's not that you become stronger in organizing. No, you don't even try to organize the subconscious activity. You just pass by. But the activity is happening, is there. It always will be there. There will always be occasions where you're going to be overwhelmed, angry, full of fear. Of course, what we want to see is whether this is going to stop your activity, affect your activity, make you reverse into an old mode where your self-preservation is clearly not the first thing that that directs your activity. So it's essential, I think, here to remember that Alexander did not stop stressing the importance of conscious direction and the necessity for conscious action. That sentence, stressing the importance of conscious direction and necessity for conscious action, well, comes directly from the universal constant in living. I did not invent this. I just read it. So in the midst of strong emotion, we must keep a voice pointing to the necessity of conscious action, and it's only through practice of making decisions under duress that this becomes possible. So now, this may sound quite strange because the modern Alexander technique, somatic technique, has totally forgotten or, well, somehow dissimulated the founder's concept of use of the psychophysical organism. together with the adequate use of the same time of the parts of the organism. Alexander talks about an adequate use at the same time of the parts of the organism. And so I've taken a picture, I'm showing at the moment a picture, a very conventional picture of a teacher working with a student with her hands. So it's a picture that I've taken from a training course. This is an image taken from the training course where a student, apprentice teacher, is receiving a lesson by a teacher that is STAT qualified. And I have made traces on the image to show how I read that image and that use. Adequate use at the same time of the parts of the organism. I cannot but stress that part of the sentence. The importance of conscious direction here is not associated with the necessity for conscious action. I will explain. What I see is that the teacher that has received the 3-year training course and has certainly practiced for 10 years before becoming a teacher in a training course, the teacher, when she places her hands on the pupil, use of herself, which is the use of their psychophysical mechanism, which is what she thinks in her head, yeah, and use of the different parts of the organism are not combined. How can I say this? Well, I can say this because when you look at the shape of the torso of the person, you suddenly realize that the person is arching the back very strongly. And as the cervical spine is connected with the rest of the spine, it's obvious that bending the thoracolumbar spine in that way, protruding the abdomen, well, she is really pulling back with the upper thoracic spine. As a result, her neck is really retracted. And when I rotate the image, I have rotated the image because I wanted to see if that person torso was upright. You know, when you are working like this, you are in semi-sitting position. Sometimes it was called monkey in the past. We prefer to use semi-sitting because the person is as if in the way of sitting. What you can see when you look at the person placed upright is how the person would look if upright in that manner. Well, in that manner, it is absolutely obvious that the person is retracting the upper torso, retracting the neck, so that the head is very, very far backward relatively to the abdomen. The person has what we call a straight back posture, yeah, and her sternum is completely inclined backward at the top. This is exactly what Alexander defined as a wrong use of the self. And there is something here, is that obviously the teacher is in the midst of an activity. In the midst of that activity, her attention is on what she's doing to the pupil. In the technique, we are more interested into directing our attention of what we are doing to ourselves. And that person is not directing her speech. She's not directing her attention to what she's doing to herself. It's even more intriguing because this image is posted on the website of the training course. That is intriguing because how is it that the teacher that posted this could not see that the teacher is misusing herself very, very badly at the moment of touching the pupil? when you make a physical contact with somebody in the technique, in Alexander's books, you are supposed to organize yourself. And before organizing the people with your hands, you should organize yourself. You compare this. So here we have a first generation teacher. It's Charles Neal, and Charles Neal is leaning forward. There is a correspondence. The idea is to bring the hands forward. So he's mowing the grass. She's placing her hands. There is much more physical need of force in the Neal's example, but the result is the same. There is absolutely no need of shortening the back in order to put the hands on the pupil. What is more interesting is that the adequate use of the parts. Alexander says the adequate use at the same time of the part of the organism. Well, it means, in Alexander's mind, to stick to the decision to move different parts at the same time. Well, at least that's how I teach it. That's how I understand it. To stick to the decision to move the parts at the same time. And this is what I mean. I say represent a totally new objective lesson for the conscious mind. There are so many differences here. For example, there is one I want you to note. I discussed already this kind of realization by scientists. They've discovered that there are more and more cases of obstruction of the airways. That you will recognize as, for example, people snoring, people having sleep apnea, that while they sleep, they suddenly lack air. And very often their sleep is interrupted because they wake up trying to breathe. Yeah? And so they discovered something. They discovered that a concept they call neck retraction. And neck retraction can be analyzed in two different ways. First, we have a very prominent spot. Your jaw is made of, you would say, two lines that are creating what we call the mandibular angle. The mandibular angle is the angle between the mandibular ramus, which is the portion of bone that is making the jaw. There are two ramus, and so you have one line there, and we have another one that is going to the top of the jaw. And so the center of that angle, the center of the mandibular angle, I call mandibular angle spot, yes. And the scientists discovered that when a person has, respiratory obstruction, it's absolutely clear that this is associated with a position of the mandibular angle relatively both to the front of the hyoid bone, the bone that is just above the larynx. So we have here you can see the shape of the hyoid bone, and also relatively to the top of the torso. And so we see here the mandibular angle backward relatively to the hyoid bone front, and of course backward relatively to the top and lower sternum. Okay, so you observe and you suddenly discover that in the case of the first generation teacher, the mandibular angle is obviously far forward of the hyoid bone of the larynx. We see on this picture that there are two different reactions to the need of self-preservation. Everybody will understand that if you put your hands all day on people, because you will need to preserve yourself. And the use of the self is simply that. How to open your airways, how to suspend your rib cage, how to lengthen your back, how to, in fact, make this, suppress this protruding abdomen. all that, we can say that that person has no idea of what we mean by using the parts of the organism. And we cannot say that she understands the importance of conscious direction and the necessity for conscious action. We are faced with a person here that, for example, something in these schools, there is that pseudo instruction of wishing for the neck to be free. The outcome of such pseudo order is to associate self-speech with an imaginary feeling that has been felt certainly when she was manipulated by her own teachers. I'm talking of the teacher herself, manipulated by her own teachers, and when she was manipulated, she was supposed to understand that pseudo instruction, wishing for the neck to be free. Obviously, after many years, that is how she reacts to the stimulus of placing her hands on the pupil. And we can see that associating self-speech with an imaginary feeling that is totally disconnected from the different action movements of the different parts of the spine that the subject should be able to command in order to lengthen the back and place the neck very far forward so the head could be forward of the abdomen. That is what we see here, in such a way as to open the airways. Well, the tendency to suppress action is not what I teach. It's what the modern Alexander technique has taught my student. My student has had a long series of modern Alexander technique sessions. And I cannot but think that her present quandary or difficulty at the moment with the emotions is also due to that disconnection of the orders from the action at the same time that could fulfill what we want. So when Alexander says, let the neck be free, it's absolutely obvious that the student should not try and let the neck be free directly. It's impossible to let the neck be free. It's impossible that thinking let the neck be free could lead to having the neck free. Like we have a person here, a teacher, so 3 plus 10 years of practice, that's 13 years of thinking, let the neck be free, and I just cannot see it in the way she's performing, and also the suppression of action has been part of the training of my student. And so now there is a total disconnection between our idea that we should not suppress a reaction and the fact that, in fact, the mode, the direction of the teaching she's received was really to suppress action. It's suppress action in the intellectual sense, saying that when you have no idea of how to organize the movements of the parts in order to uncurve the lumbar spine, make sure that you get a new support for the torso, is that the abdomen is receding, that the shoulders are directed forward of the torso, that the neck, of course, is, directed by the thoracic spine. When you have the middle spine movement, like here, that is protruding the middle torso, I hope you can understand what I'm saying, that when the person is making an action with the middle torso, that action with the middle torso has a consequence that can be seen at the front. And we can see that at the front, the abdomen is very far forward of the top of the sternum, the top of the front of the torso. So the upper thoracic spine movement is obviously directed in opposition to that movement of the middle torso. For to bend the spine, yeah, if you want to bend the spine, it's obvious that the movement at the extremities must be in opposite direction to the movement in the center. Otherwise, it is impossible to protrude the abdomen, curve shorten the spine movement. Therefore, we suddenly discover something that is quite obvious, is that the cervical spine movement, that is what most people would call the neck movement, is going to follow the movement of the upper thoracic spine and retract the head backwards relatively to the middle torso. All these movements are connected. They are connected to produce the wrong adjustment as they are connected to produce the right adjustment. So the connection between the orders, the connection between the movements is apparently inexistent. I can't understand why the teacher would react like this. If she had this understanding of the cause and effect relationship between the movement and the position, well, she could not. And she could certainly not miss it. When watching the video that is posted, she would see that the video is showing wrong use of the parts of the torso when the teacher is touching the student, and that I would just discard the video. So we have a habit of subconscious coordination of movements of the parts of the spine. And apparently this habit reigns without opposition from the conscious mind. So the person, that teacher, has been told to inhibit any decisions of movement that could trigger a feeling of tension. It's clear that the person will wish the neck to be free, leaving the subconscious habit of use untouched. And worse, the person will start to believe that she's on the path of improvement. She's going to believe that she's a special person, a special teacher. But it's obvious to me that her development has stalled, and that the habit is certainly getting worse. I don't think that she would have finished her training course showing a monkey like this. But now, this is habitual to the point that she does not see anything wrong with it when she posts the video on the internet. So, her habitual use has come back or has persisted despite having received a full 3-year training course of somatic training, in which her sensory appreciation of what she's doing with the different parts of the organism is supposed to have been re-educated. In fact, re-educated may not be the correct term. I think it has been strengthened. I think she really now believes that her sensory appreciation, which is associated with the subconscious voice in her mind, that sensory appreciation has taken the lead. She feels without tension when she performs in this way. She feels secure. She feels fine. She has, very nice emotions. So you can have very, very nice emotions while misusing yourself completely. So if you come back to this idea of the stimulus to act for self-preservation, you must rethink the importance of emotions. You can have very bad emotions with perfect use, and you can have very positive emotion with absolute wrong use. So it's clear we are victim of an habitual response in thought and action, either when we want positive emotions or when we want to suppress negative emotion. I am saying that emotions are there to stay, that they are part of our mind, And commanding freedom in thought and action is just freedom to have any kind of emotion, but still direct yourself with a stimulus to self-preservation in any activity. There is, well, we have mowing, we have bending, we have sitting, walking, we have sitting at the desk to discuss, for example, our subject of today. Well, it's possible to imagine that we can do that while developing and improving what we call an adequate or correct use. When I use the terms as adequate and correct in connection with the manner of use of the psychophysical organism, it must be understood that they indicate conditions of psychophysical functioning which are the best at any given time for the working of the organism as a whole. I wanted to demonstrate that, for example, when the teacher is putting the hands, the conditions of psychophysical functioning are not the best at any given time for the organism as a whole. This use of the mechanism of the torso is absolutely incorrect. And when my student is in the midst of emotion, I want her to stick with that simple idea that a potentiality for thinking in activity in the general use of the self has to be developed despite the fact that she's, well, feeling strong emotions. Strong emotions are not a reason why we practice the technique. We are not there to establish an order, establish constructive emotions. No, emotions are emotions. They are part of the subconscious world, and we are not so much interested in them. We are much more interested in our capacity of suppressing mind wandering, making sure that we can continue the activity, the constructive path, to slowly develop the desirable combination in activity, the correct use of psychophysical mechanism. By that I mean how we use verbal orders, how we use self-speech toward yourself, and of course this adequate use at the same time of the parts of the organism. It's interesting that Alexander is saying at the same time, an adequate use at the same time of the part of that organism. At first, when I read the sentence where he says a desirable combination in human activity and adequate, so there are two factors. One is an adequate and correct use of psychophysical organism as a whole. And he says together with a second one. And the second one is an adequate use at the same time of the parts of the organism. We have to make an adequate use at the same time of the part of the organism in the midst of strong emotions. So my student is still wanting to organize her emotions. I would like her to revisit that desire, revisit that idea, and stick to the work for the moment. Any questions or comment?
Negative emotions are associated with self-talk. So people are saying words to themselves to make them feel bad, and it increases the emotions, or the emotions bring up certain words in their mind. So there's one set of self-talk going on for people normally that they just think of as, you know, emotional issues. And what you're saying is to set up a second process of self-talk that's the consciously guided, organized self-talk alongside that. So you have there's the two things happening, and you just let the other one happen. And over time, with practice, you'll start acting more in accordance with the conscious set of self-talk. rather than the subconsciously guided self-talk. Is that right?
That's correct, but there is an added bonus, I would say, to constructive conscious control, is that as you are using speech to organize, well, the use at the same time of all the parts, in order to organize the movements of the torso, the neck, the head together, you're improving your functioning and you're improving your poise. You're improving your equilibrium. And I stress that we don't want to organize these emotions. Organizing the mind doesn't mean organizing the emotions. We don't want to try and change the emotions, suppress the emotions. Because the more you're balanced, the more you're capable to accept these negative emotions as passing elements of your field of attention. At first, it's very, very difficult when you feel fear or anger or I don't know. You've been restricted into something that you want and you cannot have it of your own fault or the fault of others. You can always direct the fault to others. It's very simple. Well, when you're in the midst of that, your activity is restricted. And so we want to expand our activity. And we start expanding this activity with that stimulus to self-preservation, that stimulus to balance, that stimulus to, I have no fear to say, to physical equilibrium first. Let's start with, when you're in the midst of strong emotions, you need some compass, something to guide yourself. Otherwise, it's like you're in a maelstrom. Your activity is taken over. It's the worst kind of mind wandering that you can imagine. And that, in these conditions, it's necessary to have a compass. The compass is very simple. I'm going to set my feet on the floor. I'm going to organize the lower torso for support with the legs, and I'm going to support the torso with the arm at the same time. I am going to create, of course, a new balance. But that is not to make myself calm. I am not going to calm my emotions. I do not. It's a separate work. Letting the emotion follow their course is one work, and the other work is creating the condition for being capable of letting the emotion run their life.
So rather than just swap one set of emotions for a new set that's more pleasurable, you're learning how to act and do things regardless whether it's good or whether it's pleasant or unpleasant emotions, because you're doing what you've, as Alexander would say, reasoned out that you wanted to do.
Exact. So
and I've also noticed that when you're consciously guiding movements, it seems like it wouldn't be related to emotions. If someone's like a new pupil, it doesn't seem like they're related. But when you can overcome and inhibit your reactions to the physical movements and to the reactions you have to the new movements, and because these things are so intimate to you, your habits, your movement habits feel like you, and then when you start changing them, it can be frightening to people or just weird. Once you can overcome that, when you can stop reacting to those stimuli, it becomes much easier to stop reacting to an external stimuli from someone else. So then the things that were emotional problems that you maybe have socially don't bother you anymore, because that's a small thing to deal with. It's not as connected with you, it's more separate from you already. And you'll just find over time that your emotional reactions have changed, but not because you change your emotions. It's just something that happens indirectly over time.
You're growing, your development is on the move, and you're becoming more adult. You can become more adult at any age, I swear. It's a truth. You will find some people reacting like childs when they are 60 or 70 or 80. You don't have to be a child to react as a child. So yes, it's necessary to develop our capacity for self-preservation, but it's, sometimes it's better to say it's our development. It's a necessary development to go away from the subconscious guidance of feelings, of emotions and sensation. Same game.
Excellent. Okay, for people watching the video, if you go underneath, you'll find Jeando's email address and the link to his website so that you can book a lesson. And we'll see you all in the next video. Thanks, Jeando.
Thank you, Kevin.